Good afternoon, and thank you for attending this presentation. I'm Gifreu Castells, and I come from Autonomous University of Barcelona. And basically, I will talk in this 10 minutes, first of all, about my background, only for the first minute, because I think this is important to understand that this is a very important part of my presentation. This part of nonfiction narratives has started in 2006, 2007 with this research on interactive documentary, and then jump into the moment, actually, what I'm doing about nonfiction narratives. So this is a huge research during more than maybe 10, 15 years, and I will present today some results, but ordered in terms of authenticity, in terms of discourse of sobriety in that way. And it's important to know that the objective here, or maybe the research question, is about I want to establish a comparative study between discourses of audiovisual, interactive, transmedia, and immersive nonfiction narratives in order to assess their degrees of authenticity and verisimilitude. In that way, I think that it's important to establish some context before about the term nonfiction. What is the term nonfiction about? In Latin, it's coming from this word factum, or refers to facts. That is something that has happened at a certain time and place. So it's something that you can establish at a certain point, which is supposed to be real, about reality. But this is like the tricky thing about that. So if you go deeper in that, the term nonfiction has used by or understood as a macro genre in terms of narrative things that have encompasses genres, narratives, and discourses such as documentary film, journalism, museums, anthropology, or historiography, among others. There's a huge field that is a little bit, maybe I would say a lot, unexplored to the public and to the academia. However, the same treatment has not been equally in terms of fiction. I mean, we can, for example, understand that in fiction we have drama, we have comedy, for example, but what happened about nonfiction? So we are going to use, or we are going to try to map this big field, which is nonfiction narrative in that way. So this is a first, let's say, draw figure about what we started from some references in narrative, for example, some references in narrative, then we mixed up between audiovisual and digital realms, and then we get to a main framework or to a main background about authors that make some interesting treatments in terms of nonfiction narratives. You can here see some examples, and then we established doing some kind of previous research, literature research, and keeping on with the context, we found that there are authors and referents in the ways of fiction, in the field of fiction, basically is very different from fiction. But we have to know that basically there's a level of construction in both, in fiction and non-fiction genres in that way. So the problem that we have here is with the emergence of digital media, basically, and not to say for AI, for example, which I come later about that, we see that what is the referent? I mean, we are talking about some kind of indexability, indexical image, which is the reality of the image. Could be a person, could be a place, could be a time, etc. But this referent maybe disappear in digital narrative. So we have a problem here which we want to try. So the presence of authenticity in the discourse is very different, and it could be embodied through a real reference or indicative character. But what happens with digital media, and what happens nowadays with artificial intelligence, for example? No, it can disappear, and it gives problems to the narrative thesis. So there's some way, as Cobo Duran suggests, could be a contract of the authentic with the viewer. So this could be more or less clear, for example, but in nonfiction could become critical in that way, because we are supposed to understand that there is a real referent which is not anymore there, for example. So in terms of methodology, what we did here is basically to start on a qualitative approach, case study, and we complemented by a focus group designed to obtain impressions from individuals of different ages in different projects from Autonomous University in Barcelona. So we just went for 3 stages. Stage 1, we did a bibliographic review, and then we adopted 4 of the more recognized and commonly accepted genres, for example, in the field of sobriety, which are documentary, essay, journalism, and education. So we take these 4 narrative discourses, genres, and formats, and then we mixed up with 4 modes of representation, like audiovisual, interactive, transmedia, and immersive. Generative or artificial intelligence is, for me, like a very unknown field yet. So next step maybe would be that. The second stage, we chosen these 4 representative formats, and basically what we did there is to mix up, especially with false documentary, interactive essay, transmedia journalism, and hybrid and virtual education, which is, to me, some of key special experiments in terms of hybridization, which is a very important word today in the field of narrative studies. So basically, here you have some examples or some tendencies, I would say, in the way of, or in the field of documentary, which is my main field, which is the film essay, as for example, Chris Marker and Luc Godard, for example, very important reference. Dogma documentary, Lars von Trier, or the reconstruction of ephemeral cinema by Kevin Rafferty and Peter Forgatz, for example, were analyzing films of these movements of the autobiographical documentary or the cinema of appropriation, experimental ethnography, Three Team in Hague, which is a very important movement in the way from Asia, autobiographical cinema, first-person documentary, and the reconstruction or dramatized documentary by Errol Morris, for example. So we take this reference, we saw the movies, we analyze, we make some kind of discourse analysis, and we try to mix up in the final revision of that. In the third stage, where we are exactly nowadays, we are creating and finalizing with categorization model analysis sheet in order to elaborate a series of levels based on the concept defined in this first stage, which for us, there are 3 indicators, which are authenticity, realism, and truthfulness. So we are trying to analyze what degree of these kind of 3 indicators are present in these movies, in these films, in the discourse analysis, and of course, in other things like the focus group and the analysis sheet that we are developing. Finally, we found some conclusions. I won't be able to have time to express more conclusions because I have 1 minute left. But the degree of veracity, realism, and authenticity perceived by the viewer of an audiovisual non-fiction work, transmedia and immersive, could have a decisive impact on the quality, understanding, and impact of the work, which is very important for the viewer. And basically, with non-fiction representations, this could be very critical in terms of acquiring different degrees of fidelity to reality, which is an idea that Emberg and Walter expressed a few years ago. My final idea or my final provocation about that is, okay, we talked about several discourses, narratives, etc. We mix up with forms of representation. It's not only audiovisual today, it's about interactive, it's about transmedia, it's about immersive, generative. But I didn't talk about AI. Everyone is talking about that in education, which is a very important issue there. But my question is, what will happen in the future, which is not the future, is the present, when we will be not able to differentiate between images for the real, for documentary, for journalism, for education, whatever, for non-fiction, sometimes even in fiction, but we believe in fiction more or less, we believe in this kind of contract, but what happens in non-fiction? What happens if this kind of indexical image is lost? What happens with us? What happens not only in communication, what happens with our brain, with our health, with our wealth even? So we are discussing about that. I think it's very interesting, and the next step of the study, maybe it's a R+D project, maybe I don't know, because it's quite complicated, even in Spain, as you can imagine, more the south, more complicated. But basically, my idea is to open up to the Autonomous University, which is a big university in Spain, and to make this bigger with the R+D project, trying to analyze what happened with this, especially in generative artificial intelligence. So thank you very much, and I wait for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you.